One of the first things that you're going to need to do when you look at a client is you're going to have to determine whether they're ready to be fixed or not. Whether they're ready to be helped. A lot of times what happens is an individual is ordered to go into counseling, and because they're being ordered to go into counseling, they're not really serious. And if they're not really serious, nothing's going to happen. I keep telling you that people are fixed from the inside. They have to want to do it themselves. And the best way to do that is for you to allow them to actually come up with the decisions that need to be made as far as their problem is concerned. So if you're dealing with an alcoholic, you're dealing with somebody that is trying to stop smoking, you're dealing with a heroin addict, a lot of times you'll be running into somebody that really doesn't want to be fixed. Maybe it's a family situation where the father was abusive. And you know, in that case, the individual may really not want to stop abusing his children, but of course he's ordered to do that, and therefore he does go in. But of course he has no intention of changing. Actually, they came up with this plan back in the 90s, in the late 90s, in 1999. Prochaska did research looking at individuals who were in weight reduction programs, in smoking cessation programs, and sobriety studies. And what he discovered was that there are 5 stages of readiness to be fixed. And those 5 stages are the pre-contemplation stage. In other words, they're not really thinking about it, they don't want to, they don't care. The contemplation stage is where they're actually thinking, well, maybe I should do this. But they're still not really prepared. Come on in. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Do you need to talk to me?
Yeah.
Okay, just a second.
Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Do you know when your online class, actually this online class?
Okay.
So I was wondering if I can just take it in class now.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sit down, have a seat. Take it easy. I don't have you on my list. You'll have to sign in.
Okay, that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah, this will be fun. Good. That changes things a little bit. Yeah, okay, because before I had 17 and 16, and now I have 16 and 17. So that's better. Okay, so there's 5 stages. The pre-contemplation stage, they're not even thinking about changing. The contemplation stage, they've at least thought about it, but they haven't convinced themselves yet. The preparation stage, where they're really thinking about it, and they really want to change, but that hasn't taken place yet. The action stage, of course, is where they are trying to change, and then the maintenance stage is after. That's okay. People will try to get away from. Look, all you guys are in the way in the back of the room. That's okay.
Too popular back here.
Yeah, it's Edison that's popular. That's okay. And then the maintenance stage is after they have changed or potentially have changed. They have to maintain themselves. Recidivism is very common in people that have had a problem for an extended length of time. It has become a condition for them. They have conditioned themselves to act in a certain negative way. So it's very common for them if they get into another serious situation that they go back to the way they were before. The abusive parent that I was talking about before. Maybe he's convinced himself he doesn't need to do this, and he stops, and then the child does something especially bad, and he decides that the only way to discipline the child is by striking the child. Or somebody who is a drinker. They've been drinking for an extended length of time. They convince themselves, well, this isn't really good, this is really healthy, so I need to stop. And they do, and they stop for an extended length of time, and then all of a sudden something stressful comes up, and of course they go back to drinking. Why? Because that is their coping technique. That is a coping technique that they've learned. And maybe they're trying to fight it, they're trying to fight it, and they're trying to fight it, but it's such a serious situation that they have no control over, that they go back to drinking. I had a student in Montana who was a meth head. She used crystal meth. Of course, crystal meth is one of those things that you really can't do for an extended length of time or it kills you. And she was smart enough to stop. And she was fine as long as she stayed away from Great Falls. Great Falls, Montana is like the crystal meth capital of the world or something, I don't know. So anytime she went so she stayed away from Great Falls. As long as she stayed away from Great Falls, she was okay. If she went back to Great Falls, then that whole conditioning process took place, and she wanted to go back to using. So she was fine, She even went back to Great Falls without any problem. And then her father was, he was in an accident. It was one of those what do they call those things? Where it makes rows out of the hay. Anyway, he was trying to fix the thing and it came down on top of him. And it stabbed him 15, I know, it's a god-awful story. Anyway, he was stabbed like 15 times. He didn't kill him, but of course she had to go back to Great Falls because he was in the hospital in Great Falls. And while she was there, because of the stress of her father nearly dying, and you know, all the rest of it, she started using again. And then she got arrested for doing the same thing that she did before. She was forging checks. I don't know why crystal meth makes you want to forge checks, but every time she took crystal meth, she started forging people's checks, stealing and forging people's checks. Anyway, so she went to jail for 6 months. When she came out, she was clean again, and everything was fine, everything was fine. Until about 2 years later, her father died, and she went back to Great Falls, and of course, because of the stress of the death of her father, she started using again. And this time she had a psychotic episode. And it was a really, really serious situation because she thought she was somebody else. She not only thought she was somebody else, she thought she was somebody else who wasn't even the same race that she actually was. She's native, of course. She was part Aleut and part Groban. And she thought she was Mexican. And she started speaking Mexican.
I'm sorry, what chapter are you on?
11. Sorry. Yeah, I've been jumping around a little bit. I did 10 and then I did 9 for some unknown reason. I guess I can't read numbers very well. But this is chapter 11. Okay, so, you know, you can go through this whole process and sometimes you go back to where you were before. And that's exactly what happened to her. She had a psychotic episode, and that really scared her because, well, she was forging checks again. She went back to jail, this time for 1.5 years. And she had 2 kids, and she had no significant other. So, and her dad was dead now. And before, her dad just took her boys. But now there was no father to take her sons. And she was kind of in a mess. And she went to jail for 18 months. I mean, and this was her 3rd strike. Montana doesn't have the 3rd strike policy, but they do tend to put you in jail for a lot longer if you're a repeat offender. Anyway, okay, so that's maintenance. Pre-contemplation. In the pre-contemplation stage, the individual denies or lacks understanding of his problem behavior. Since the individual does not recognize their problem, they do not see the need for change, of course. So this is when you're trying to convince the guy that he really is a drunk. No, I can stop whenever I want to. The famous last words of an addict. No, of course I can stop whenever I want to. Since the individual does not recognize it, okay. They may blame their problem on others, of course, and usually that's what happens, especially with alcoholics. They're really good at that. As a matter of fact, they're professional liars. They're number one. They're ace number one. People who have antisocial personality disorder are really good liars as well, but alcoholics are very good as well. They may only agree to see a practitioner because someone else has suggested or required it. And of course, this is, if you've ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting, he has anger issues. He doesn't understand why he has anger issues. And of course, he's so brilliant that he thinks that he knows everything. And of course, eventually, he realizes that his anger issues come from being physically and sexually abused by his father. As curious as that is. Anyway, so a lot of people don't think that they have a problem. They're not admitting it yet, and of course that's the pre-contemplation stage. If you don't drink very much and one night you decided to have a couple beers and you lost count at 11, and then got in your car and got in trouble, and then of course they made you go to traffic court, and then you had to do 200 hours of community service. You really don't have a problem because this is a rarity for you. You really don't do this. But of course, if you have been doing this and been doing it in secret, then you don't think you have a problem, and you may actually have a problem. A person who abuses substances, but despite many arrests for driving under the influence, does not consider themselves to have a problem that needs to be addressed. Of course, this is the pre-contemplation stage as well. This is a really serious problem with people that smoke pot. People that marijuana doesn't make you really smart, but what it does do, it makes you a really bad driver. But people don't. They think it's harmless. They can't do it. It's a natural thing, so it can't possibly hurt you. So they drive anyway. And of course, this has been a really serious problem in Colorado since they legalized marijuana. It seems like you know, there's lots of states with that have legalized marijuana, but all the crazies seem to be going to Colorado for some reason. We'll figure it out. There's got to be a reason why they're going to Colorado instead of Washington or California or Oregon. You know, Oregon's a state full of really nutty people. So, I mean, why wouldn't they go to Oregon instead? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Alaska? You can go to Alaska. It's cold in Alaska. Who wants to go to Alaska? Colorado is not that warm. A gang that lives in a community with high levels of violence who believe they can continue perpetrating violence and not be personally affected. If you've ever been to a party, when you were in high school, if you ever went to a party, and here's like a guy in his 30s, and he's trying to pick up on all these young chicks. What's that all about? Does he still think he's 18 or whatever? But of course, gangs do the same thing. If you go to Chicago, the individuals that are running the drug trade, or the individuals that were running the drug trade up there, were former gang members. They were Bloods and Crips. They were running the drug trade and prostitution trade and numbers trade. Of course, the Mexican cartels have taken over the drug trade in Chicago, and they killed all these guys off. Well, they killed most of them off or drove them away. You know, these guys were in their 20s and 30s and 40s. They were still acting like gang people. Another good example would be Hell's Angels, the bikers in California. They used to control things back in the 70s and the 80s. And some of these guys are still riding their bikes. If they're still alive, they're still riding their bikes and doing all the things that they were doing before. The problem now is you can't really ride a motorcycle for an extended length of time without a helmet and keep your hair. So a lot of these guys are bald and fat, you know. But they've got tattoos all over their bodies, and they ride their hogs, and they intimidate people with their size and with their inability to feel pain. When I was working in Oklahoma, we had a guy that was a biker that came in, and there's a lot of things that happen to you when you ride a motorcycle a lot. One of them is that it thickens your skin. People don't realize that because, you know, you're driving along at 70 miles an hour and you don't have any covering over your arms, and it literally thickens your skin. It thickens the skin on your face. So it was really kind of an interesting situation. I had to draw this guy's blood, and he was like this tall, but he weighed like 300 pounds. I mean, he was round. This is a round guy. So he sticks out his arm. Of course, his arm's only this long. But I had to draw blood from him, and the first thing he did, he took his knife out of his pocket, he opened it up, put it on the table, and he said, "If you hurt me, I'm gonna cut you." Oh man, nobody can ever get my blood, but he's going to cut me if I hurt him. So I looked at his arm, and of course his skin is like this thick. Yeah. So anyway, I drew him from the back of his hand. Had no problems getting his blood from the back of his hand. Afterwards, he was just, "Oh, yeah, I have to come in and see you every time I need my blood drawn. These people just dig around and dig around and dig around and poke around and poke around," is what he said. Anyway, I got his blood. He didn't cut me. He was real happy, and he apologized later for threatening me. You know, it's not the best way to. Anyway, a husband who comes along to counseling because his wife thinks that they have problems, but doesn't see any problems himself. Pre-contemplation stage. Of course, it's her problem because she's the one that's complaining. Obviously, how could it possibly be his problem? He doesn't have any problems, of course, but the wife makes him go in. "I'll leave you if you don't go into counseling." Okay, so he goes into counseling. How much good is it going to do him if he doesn't think he has a problem? And the answer is, well, none whatsoever. Anyway, we're still in the pre-contemplation stage. A wife who wants to end her marriage and comes to counseling to ease her guilt. Maybe she's going to counseling in order to tell herself, "I did everything that I could to save the marriage. I even went to counseling." And of course, a lot of married couples will do this. They decide to get a divorce. Somebody tells them, "Well, you can't just go get a divorce. You need to try to save your marriage." And so they do go into counseling, but of course, they have no intention of changing the way that they're doing things and to actually save their marriage. They've already decided at that point they're going to get a divorce. A person who has had a serious health crisis and has been told to change their eating habits but states, "I've always eaten this way and I'm not going to change now." And of course, two years later, they're dead because, of course, they're dead. There's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, you can tell them that they need to take to go on a diet. I had a neighbor that he ate potato chips and Coke. That was his major diet. He was a farmer, and his mother died, and his brother moved away, and his dad died. He was running the farm all by himself, and he could do anything that he wanted. He watched television, and he farmed. He was a good farmer, and the doctors told him, "You know, all you do is eat fat, and you eat sugar. It's going to kill you." And he said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'll start eating carrots or something. I don't know." Anyway, you'd see him gnawing on a carrot with a bag of potato chips over here. He always had one of the biggest bag you could possibly imagine. Anyway, so he's eating these potato chips. He's got a couple of carrots in his pocket. Anyway, after a couple of years, he was dead, died of a heart attack. Of course he died of a heart attack. I mean, he was as big and round as this guy is. Anyway, that kind of stuff happens. Pre-contemplation, practitioners should focus on raising clients' awareness of their urgency, of the issues and the pain or fear involved. Of course, this isn't always going to change things. You can tell them you really need to take care of this problem. But does it work? And the answer is not very often. Until they are ready to change, they're not going to change. They're not even going to think about it. You can be the guy that tells them the sky is falling, but they're not going to believe it until, the first piece of the ceiling comes crashing onto their head. And they're going, "Why didn't somebody tell me this?" Counselor, if you have pre-contemplation, counselor, if you continue drinking, what do you think your life will be like in 5 years? And of course, people don't think about what it's going to look like tomorrow or next week. They're just trying to have a good time today. And of course, it's not going to convince them of anything. Oh, just the same picture. This is a guy. Counselor, I have worked with people who have changed their eating habits and become healthier. Wow, slushy, Doritos, cheese mix. These are Twinkies. Wow, these are quite a eater, isn't it? Combos, those are combos. I don't like those things. Anyway, bad eating habits. And of course, your eating habits aren't going to catch up with you until you're older. But of course, you're going to accelerate your aging process. Usually you can eat whatever the hell you want to when you're in your 20s or 30s, but then when you hit your 40s, you better figure it out. You better figure it out, otherwise you're a dead duck at 50. A person in the pre-contemplation stage isn't interested in setting goals. So if you get these individuals as a counselor, there's not a whole lot you can do with them. All you can do is keep being the individual that cries wolf. That's all you can do, is tell them where the wolves are. The target must be to get the client to think about changing their lives and whether it will improve their lives. So your job is to get them to the next stage, which is the contemplation stage, to get them to start thinking about this. What you need to do is talk to them, let them tell you if this is a problem, or maybe sometimes they're having this problem, and you would be the individual going, you know, I've seen this over and over and over again, and what I anticipate happening with you is that, you know, you're going to get sicker. Things are only going to get worse. You're going to gain more weight. You're going to start blacking out because you're drinking too much. You know, you need to give them possible consequences. These individuals don't want to hear it, but of course, if you give them consequences, if that consequence happens, niggling in the back of their mind is what you told them, and possibly that will convince them to go into the contemplation stage. And that's what you're hoping for. So the best you can do is to give them information about what might happen next. This is what you need to look for. You know, you need to look for, you need to weigh yourself every morning and find out, you know, if you've gained 10 pounds over the last week, you need to think about cutting back on the food that you're taking. If you're blacking out after you're drinking, you know, you're having a good time, and I'm not trying to tell you not to have a good time, but what I'm trying to tell you is if you're blacking out and you don't really remember what's going on, then all of a sudden this isn't as much fun as you think it is, or as you keep telling me that it is. And maybe in the future this is going to be more recurring, is the fact that you're blacking out. You know, you need to give them consequences. And possibly that will stick in their mind someplace, and the next time it actually happens, maybe they'll start thinking about it, because that's what we need to do. We need to make them think about it. The contemplation stage is the second stage. At this stage, they're contemplating change, and that's what we need to. That's where we need to get them. Driving these people through all 5 stages is not the easiest thing in the world, unless some crisis has taken place. If a crisis has taken place, usually it slaps them into thinking about it. The individual in this stage weighs the pros and cons in making a change, but they are not quite ready to move ahead with making a change. They're still stuck on, I'm having too good a time, I don't want that to change. I was watching the movie, one of my favorite movies, Three Men and a Baby. I think it's just the coolest movie, because here's these 3, you know, playboys, and somebody drops a baby on their doorstep, and all of a sudden they turn into fathers. They really turn into fathers, despite the fact that, you know, only one of them has a steady girlfriend. They just it's automatic. They turn into fathers, which is kind of cool. But of course, they need to change in order for them to take care of the baby. Somebody needs to be there all the time to take care of the baby. And that's exactly what happens. They all 3 turn into fathers. Kind of an amazing situation. Contemplation stage. Practitioners can discuss the advantages and disadvantages of changing, and of course this is the biggest problem. You need to talk about pros and cons. The person's not an idiot. As a matter of fact, they're focused on the cons that you're talking about. They're focused on them having a good time. And of course that's, you need to mention that as well. Yeah, sure, you're having a great time, and You're only 32 years old. The probability of you getting cirrhosis of the liver at this point is not very high. But at the same time, I understand you're having a good time. But there is always a possibility. People have weaker livers than others, and sometimes, depending on what you have, where you've been in your life and what you've done, potentially your liver has been damaged up to this point. And what we need to do is we need to look at you getting off of the juice. You can't lie to these people because that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping that you will lie to them so that they can discount you completely. You need to mention both pros and cons. And if you don't do that, of course, they'll just shut you down right away. It's helpful to identify barriers or challenges to make changes. The practitioner can propose small steps toward considering a change. And usually the first steps are going to be baby steps. And this is what you need to do. You need to, you don't want them to go cold turkey, certainly. You don't want to have to send them to a very expensive place to dry out. You need to make small steps. My wife was taking a anti-anxiety drug. Back in 2003, I went on a Fulbright trip for 6 months in the summertime down to South America. And while I was gone, it bothered my wife. She really missed me a lot. So they put her on an anti-anxiety drug, and when I came back, and everything became normal again. It was really kind of an odd situation because I got a parasite while I was down in South America. So I was sick for a couple of weeks, and then everything was fine. But she decided she needed to go off the anti-anxiety drug. But she couldn't. If she tried to go cold turkey, she got sick. So she couldn't go off of it cold turkey. So what she did, she opened up, it was in a capsule, and she opened up the capsule and she counted all of the little beads in there, and every day she reduced it by one bead, one little piece, and there were like 48 in there. So after 48 days, she actually was off the anti-anxiety drug. Small steps, baby steps, she's taking one little tiny bead out. My goodness gracious, how much of an impact could that have on her? And the answer was none. It didn't have any impact on her. She was able to wean herself off of the anti-anxiety drugs by taking out one bead every day. And that works for her. Anyway, so we're in the contemplation stage. She knew that she wanted to go off the anti-anxiety drugs. She felt like she didn't need them anymore. The problem was she was hooked on this stuff. This stuff was relatively strong. So she really needed to go off of it. So she decided to do it her own way. The doctor didn't tell her how to do it. She just did it her own way. So baby steps. We're talking about baby steps. It was oops, did I go the wrong direction? Wait a minute. That's right. Contemplation practitioner, as you think about giving up marijuana, what do you consider would be the advantages and disadvantages of giving up marijuana? And of course, there are always positives and negatives, and you need to talk about the disadvantages as well. People have convinced themselves that they can't relax unless they smoke this stuff. So potentially one of the things that you're going to have to talk about, that. Well, how in the world are you going to be able to relax if you've conditioned yourself to use this drug in order to relax? So you can't lie to these people. If you try to lie to them, they'll shut you down. Client, I am not ready to make any changes right now, of course, and that's possible, especially if you're talking about drugs, you're talking about an addiction or alcohol. Maybe they're not ready to do that yet. But they're thinking about it. And maybe the next time they go out and drink, instead of having 11 beers like we talked about before, they'll only have 9. Or they'll only have 7. Or they won't actually get completely inebriated. Maybe this time they'll try to have a good time without the masses of alcohol. They will drink a 6-pack and stop it at 6 or something. They will string them out over through the night rather than chug-a-lug at the beginning of the night so that they are the life of the party. Oops, sorry. Client, I have wondered if some of the problems on this team are because I am kind of dominating, but on the other hand, I think we get more accomplished because I am pushy. And of course, that's what the client is saying. The client is saying maybe there's something wrong with me, maybe it's not the team, maybe I need to change, and okay, well, we're in the contemplation stage. The client, my boss thinks I should get over my fear of making speeches, but I am just not sure if it is something that I can do. One of the major problems that people have in the United States is fear of public speaking, of course. You feel like you're up there completely naked. You're not, but usually, I guess. But you feel like you're exposing your ignorance to everybody. Of course, that's what I'm doing right now, is exposing my ignorance to everybody. I apologize. I guess it doesn't bother me that much. Contemplation, client, I keep getting sent to the principal's office for fighting, and then I can't play in the next football game. I don't like getting in trouble, but I have to stand up for myself. And of course, that is something that you have to weigh. My daughter teaches high school in Clinton, Iowa. And she had a student that, they have a zero tolerance policy for fighting at Clinton High School. And this guy just kept hitting this kid, and finally he retaliated. And they both, of course, they both got kicked out of school, but the whole point was that once he retaliated, he was kicked out of school too. And that's what the other kid was trying to get him to do, is to retaliate, but because they have a zero tolerance policy. First time that other kid threw the punch, he was out of school, and he wanted to make sure that the other kid was out of school as well. Sad, sad situation. Sometimes standing up for yourself gets you into a lot more trouble. Contemplation, client, we had discussed forming a committee to address the problems in this organization, but I wondered if we would really accomplish anything if we put that committee together. How many people can you put in a committee and still make it function? What's the best number? Yeah, 5. Anything over 5 and you'll never get any agreement. Yeah, 5. 3's better, but you know, the smaller the number, the better you are. But 5 is the max. Exactly. Thank you. Practitioners can help clients identify barriers to challenges, to making changes, and also strengths that will be helpful if they decide to change. Practitioners might ask if there are small steps that they might consider that may lead to a greater willingness to change in the near future. And of course, what we're looking for in the beginning is small steps. Don't force them to go cold turkey right away. They need to take small steps. People stop smoking by counting their cigarettes in a day and making sure they don't smoke more than a select number, and then trying to reduce that number 1 a week, which is not that much if you think about it, which doesn't seem like a lot if you don't smoke. But to the smoker, of course, if they've smoked all the cigarettes that they're supposed to smoke that week, and now they have to go cold turkey for the next 2 days, they're kind of, it's a lot. That 1 cigarette is a lot. All they want is 1 more. The third stage of readiness for change is preparation. Okay, so we've been in the pre-contemplation stage where we didn't want to change. We've been in the contemplation stage where we want to change, but we don't know how, and now we're in the preparation stage. The clients are ready to change and they're looking for information. If they're in the contemplation stage, they're not ready to be fixed yet. They're not ready to be fixed until they get into the preparation stage. Once they get in the preparation stage, you can come up with goals, you can come up with the small steps, the baby steps that we have to talk about in order to get them to fix themselves. They may have already made some changes and are wanting to make more progress, and of course the changes that they make themselves without your suggestion are better changes, because these are ones that they have convinced themselves they need to do. They may have made some small steps and are ready to move forward making goals. Okay, so it's time to make goals. Is he actually moving? Yeah, let's do this. Okay. Generally, people need to be at this stage before major change will be possible. And of course, without being in this stage, the probability of them being successful is fairly remote. So they need to get into this stage. You need to make goals. They need to be prepared to stop whatever it is that they're doing. The fourth stage is the action stage. Clients are ready to take specific steps, and they may need little or no support from the practitioner. They need to feel like they're doing it themselves, which is really kind of a strange situation, because guess who gets the credit for it? They do. Of course they get the credit for it. And they may go, you know, I paid you all this money and you didn't do anything for me. I did it all myself. And the answer is, well, it wouldn't have been done if you didn't do it yourself. But if I hadn't been there, you wouldn't have done it. Well, of course, you can't argue that. You have to nod your head and go, yeah, you're right. You did it all yourself. And now, hopefully, you'll keep from stepping backwards. If the practitioner assumes that the clients are at this stage and yet they are still in a previous stage, the practitioner will likely feel frustrated. So if you're you can't accelerate the process. They have to go through well, of course, they came to you in the pre-contemplation stage, potentially. Sometimes they'll come to you in a later stage, but they may come to you in the pre-contemplation stage. You got them to think about it. Then they started preparing, and now they are going to actually fix themselves. So you have to go through all the different stages. If they are still in the contemplation stage, then it's going to make you very frustrated as to whether they're actually going to be able to do it or not. So you can't, and there are people that aren't very patient as far as this is concerned. And if you're not patient, then you're going to be constantly frustrated with your clients. You need to understand where they are. You need to diagnose them in one of these different stages. And you need to be patient. They need to do it themselves. If they're not ready, they're not ready, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't force them to be ready. You can't force them to be prepared, be in the contemplation stage. You can't do that. It doesn't work. All it's going to do is bother you. And it's going to eat you up. You're going to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and not be able to go back to sleep until 5, and then you have to get up at 6. So you're going to be fuming about this over the next whatever. This is what happened to me over the weekend. I was worried about Stephen Paddock and why the hell he shot the Las Vegas up. I know. This is a problem. This is my problem. I understand that. And I woke up. I'm worried about this. They're not coming up with any theories. I haven't seen any theories. I've seen a lot of conspiracy crap that doesn't mean anything. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you can come up with the conspiracy stuff all you want. But we need to figure out what was going on in this guy's head. And so I came up with my own theory over the weekend. And of course, you know, I hadn't seen my wife in 6 weeks. And here I am talking about Stephen Paddock. So she was leaving on the plane yesterday. We were in Albuquerque, and I'm sitting there. I'm giving her my theory as to why he did this. I'm not going to see her for another 7 weeks. And what's the last thing I say to her? I'm talking about Stephen Paddock and why he shot up Las Vegas. Yeah. Okay, so and this is a problem. This is potentially a problem. You can allow these individuals to really get to you, your clients. And I can assure you, you're not only going to have one, you're going to have a bunch. So if you're one of those people, if you're one of those A personalities that try to force people to accelerate their process, it ain't going to work, and it's going to eat you up. So you need to think about this before you start doing this, before you start counseling. If you get impatient, you're not going to be able to handle it. You've got to have the patience of Job. Okay, anyway, so you got to be careful. You got to be really, really careful. You need to understand who you are and whether you can handle it. It's tough. It's really, really tough.
I wish they'd come out with some kind of a theory as to what's going on with these guys. They've got the hotel and the police are arguing as to the timeline. Not that the timeline's all that important. Well, it is to them, of course, because if they use the timeline that the hotel had, you know that it took them an hour to blow the door. He stopped shooting and it took him an hour to open the door. That's nuts. I had to wait for the SWAT team with explosives. Sorry. What were they expecting? I know what they were expecting. They were expecting the room to blow up. That's what they were expecting. They thought it was booby trap. So that's why they didn't do it. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it was. Clients may feel that they should be ready to take steps they are not yet ready to take. Sometimes you'll have a client who's a type A personality, just like you're not supposed to be. They are impatient, and of course they want to go ahead, and they will try to accelerate themselves, and they really shouldn't do that. They need. It's like my wife and her grains of the anti-anxiety drug. She needed to do 1 a day. If she tried to accelerate it, take 5 today, you know, it would have messed her up. So you have to take the steps that are necessary, and you have to take them at the right speed. Otherwise, they'll go backwards, and you don't want that. Only about 1/3 of the clients come to the practitioner at this stage, and of course, if they are in the action stage, no sweat. This is great. It's going to be easier to try to deal with this client because they're ready to change. But most of the clients, about 2/3 of your clients, will be in an earlier stage. Have I talked about Asian clients? Asian clients don't want to talk, for one thing. They don't like to talk, and they want you to fix them. You're the expert, so it's your job to fix them. But of course, Western clients will, you know, they'll go through the whole process. But Asian clients will come in, fix me now, you know, give me something and make me better. That's the kind of situation we're going to put you in. And of course, you can't do that. So the question is, do you treat them differently? And the answer is, yeah, you have to treat them differently, but at the same time, you're not going to be able to get these guys to talk to you, and that's going to be a little bit of a problem. And they're going to want solutions, and this is what's going to happen. So you think, well, this has worked before, so I'll just tell them, you know, I'll give them the same sequence that I gave somebody else, and it's not going to work. And they're going to come back to you. You didn't fix me. You need to fix me. What's wrong with you? Here, give me another. Give me a way to fix myself, and then you'll give them another sequence of changes or things that you need to do. They need to do to change themselves, and then they're going to come back and go, "This didn't work. You need to fix me." Anyway, sorry, Japanese, Chinese. Sorry. Hopefully, you won't run into these people. Okay, action. An obese client, when faced with life-threatening health issues, joins Weight Watchers, learns to follow the program, and loses a significant amount of weight. He did this without your help. He joined Weight Watchers by himself. It wasn't your idea to do this. Yeah, that works. That can work. A parent whose children have been removed from the home because the parent used harsh, abusive means of discipline says that they will learn other ways to discipline, willingly go to a parenting class, and talks to the practitioner about ways to use what they have learned. Yeah, this person is fixing themselves, and of course that's really the only way to do it. They are willing to go to these classes. They are willing to do these things. And all you're doing is supporting them. All you're saying is, yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. Yeah, you need to do this. You know, I wouldn't do that quite yet. Why don't you wait until you get to this stage, and then you can do that. We're going to see this person back in just a second. A child realizes that they will not be able to play on a team without earning passing grades, and starts attending an after-school tutoring class in order to bring up their grades. They have already taken this action, and they really don't need your suggestions at this stage. A task group establishes a clear goal, identifies steps to achieve their goal, and talks with a practitioner about ways to work together most effectively. And of course, when we're talking about a large group, you need to get everybody to agree to do things in the right manner. A lot of times when you have a task group like this, they take on too many goals. That's usually the problem that they have. So since there are so many goals that they're trying to achieve, they don't achieve any of them. And of course they get impatient and want it to go more rapidly. Maintenance. Okay, so we're in the last stage. They have fixed themselves. They have done something. They are on the path to recovery. And now you need to maintain that, that process. The individual stopped drinking, for example. They needed to fix their lives, and they convinced themselves, or this was the problem, so they've stopped drinking. Now we need to keep them from drinking anymore. Now we need to keep them from these problems happening before. I told you the story of the young lady in Great Falls, or every time she went to Great Falls, she slipped backwards. If she was in a really serious crisis situation, she slipped back so far that she started using again. And of course, the last time it happened to her, she had a psychotic episode. She didn't know who she was. She thought she was Hispanic, and she wasn't. So she would jabber like she was speaking Spanish, and it wasn't Spanish. So they brought in a translator. It was worse than I've told you, because what happened was she went into the police department. Of course, she's got this really thick Spanish accent, despite the fact she doesn't speak Spanish. She got this really thick Spanish accent, and she tells them, my father killed my mother. He buried her in the backyard. My father killed my mother. And so the police, and she just makes up an address in Great Falls. So the police go to that house, and it's abandoned. And so they get a backhoe and they dig up the backyard. Well, there's no body in the backyard. You know, she's having a psychotic episode, for one thing. So they bring in she can barely speak English, so they bring in a translator, and she starts jabbering like she's speaking Spanish, and this guy goes, "It must be a dialect, because I don't recognize any of these words. It must be a dialect." So they were trying to figure out what was going on. They dug up the backyard. They took a backhoe out. Of course, all this costs money. Bringing the translator in. Now they're thinking of getting another translator from someplace in South America, you know, Quichua or something. Anyway, so about the third day, she came out of her psychosis, and she realized who she was. And of course, they could tell exactly when it happened because her face turned all red. And the reason it turned red was because she realized she was in a lot of trouble. And she was in a lot of trouble. What am I talking about? Oh, maintenance. Okay. So the whole reason, how you doing? So the whole reason that she faltered was because her father had died. So where did she come up with the idea that her father had killed her mother? Her mother was still alive. That was the bizarre part. She had it backwards. I know. This lady is like the antithesis. Her psychotic character was like the antithesis of who she actually was. As confusing as that all that is. Right? She was native. She didn't speak Spanish, and her character was not only Hispanic, but her character had a living father and a dead mother, and in reality she had a dead father and a living mother. I know, that's kind of bizarre. So she had to go back to prison, and of course she didn't have a father to take care of her two boys, so her mother took care of her two boys. Well, her mother was a mess, alcoholic, she was in a wheelchair. I was a mess, it was just a mess. So until she got out of prison, her boys were living with this crazy lady. I know, it's really kind of bad. Why are we talking about it? Okay, so you need to maintain, you need to follow up on the individual to make sure that maintenance is taking place. The pull to return to old behaviors is very strong. In her case, the reason she went back to using crystal meth was because her father died, and it was a crisis situation for her. And the funeral, damn it, was in Great Falls. And as soon as she got into Great Falls, I mean, it was like as soon as she crossed into the city limits, she wanted to use. And she told me this. She told me this before. Every time I cross the city into the city limits, I want to use. And of course, so who did she run into once she got to Great Falls? The people that she used with before. Why? Because she went down to that area of Great Falls where those people lived. And now she's running into these people. Now she's got all the excuses in the world to go ahead and shoot up. And that's exactly what she did. As exciting as that is. Clients need to develop ways to cope with temptations and to reward day-to-day successes. If I'm trying not to drink pop, every time I don't drink a pop, I need to congratulate myself. I need to reward myself. If you're in a stressful situation, today is a really stressful day. For me, because I have to turn in your midterm grades by 4 o'clock, which means I have to have all that stuff graded by this afternoon. And I haven't graded everything. I know. My wife was here until, what, yesterday morning, so. Then I had to drive all the way back from Albuquerque and got home. I graded a lot of stuff yesterday. I didn't grade everything. So I'll just make up the grades, if that's okay with you.
Just give us all an A.
It doesn't matter.
We'll work for the best.
It doesn't matter what grades I give you. These are non-binding grades. You know, I give you an A now and you get an F later on. You know.
Well, then you have an opportunity to maintain it or lose it.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm assuming everybody's going to do well for the rest of the semester. You're going to be very serious. Of course, if you drop off the face of the earth and don't finish, don't write your paper, which most of you are supposed to have had. If you haven't, I haven't graded hardly any papers. Edison's back in the back going, damn it, I turned in that paper 3 weeks ago. Why was it? It's still in my bag, so. The last thing I'm going to do is read the papers. So I'm going to grade all the discussions, all the short things that I can do relatively quickly, and give everybody a grade. And the last thing I'll do is the papers. So sorry, Edison. No, it's going to. I'll have it here on Wednesday. How's that? I could blame somebody, but I know whose fault it is. It's my wife's fault. It's helpful to explore how past successes have been maintained and develop ways to maintain current changes. What she needed to do was stay out of Great Falls. What she needed to do, if she went to Great Falls, was stay out of that neighborhood. What she needed to do was stay out of Great Falls. If she did go into that neighborhood, to try to stay away from those people that tried to talk her into shooting up with crystal meth. That's what she needed to do, but she didn't do any of that stuff. Unfortunately, one of those people came to her father's funeral. And then she went home with that person. And guess what happened next? She turned into a Hispanic chick that thought her mother, her father had killed her mother. Instead, her father had just died and they just buried her. Of course, she starts forging checks. I'm not exactly sure where she got it. How do you get a hold of somebody's check? How do you do that? You want to know how she did it? She'd go visit people, and then she'd go into their offices and rummage through their stuff until she found a blank check. That's what she did. Strange kid. Really strange. Anyway, so what are we doing? We're maintaining ourselves. It must be remembered that this stage can be difficult. The old behavior was maintained before because it was rewarding or it was comfortable. It was a coping technique. The more of a coping technique it was, the less likely you're going to be able to stay away from it. Because if the same situation arises, that's how you're going to strike, that's how you're going to take care of the problem. This is how you took care of the problem in the past. This is how you've been trained to take care of this problem. Maybe you come from a family that gets drunk if you have a problem. When I was in the service, my first wife left me, and of course, what happened? I had friends that came over and took me out and tried to get me drunk. I don't drink I'm not a very good drinker. But this is how you take care of it, especially if you're in the military. You get snookered, and it works, I guess. For them, they'd only been married 3 times or 4 times or whatever. This is what you do, okay. And that's what they were trying to train me to do. But of course, I came from a family of non-drinkers. I came from a county that was dry. They didn't sell any alcohol in the whole damn county. I came from a state that didn't drink very much. Ohio did. It was right over there. Ohio was like 100 miles that way. So if you wanted to get a beer, you had to go over to Ohio to find a beer. The next county over from us was a Quaker county. You know those Quakers, those wild Quakers, they're always doing crazy stuff. Clients need to learn to cope with old behaviors and temptations for the long haul. And of course, that's what you're trying to do. You eat the apple, or do you eat the piece of cake? You've just lost 50 pounds. Do you reward yourself with cake? No, you reward yourself in another way. Certainly not with sweet foods. Anyway, maintenance is a tough haul. What is it doing? An organization develops more effective ways of problem solving and plans regular meetings so potential problems can be addressed before they become bigger issues. Of course, their coping technique in the past was to pretend that the issues weren't there, to stay out to not deal with them until they become problems. And now, of course, they have meetings to make sure that there are no issues. An individual learns to stop procrastinating on projects and makes plans to check in with someone who will provide honest feedback about whether the problem seems to be reappearing. And of course, he is a good student now because he's taking care of his problems. A person who has had serious problems with alcohol abuse continues to be involved with AA. And of course, you see this a lot. Individuals that have been sober for an extended length of time are still going to AA meetings, and they're still getting the discs. I guess they give them discs or something. I had lots of friends when I was up north who were recovering alcoholics. They never called themselves recovered alcoholics because there's always a possibility. I had a friend that had been sober for 17 years. And he said every morning when he got up, 17 years, he hadn't had a drink in 17 years. And every morning when he got up, he had to tell himself that he wasn't going to drink today. And if he didn't, then he found himself doing stupid things like going to the casino where they drink. Yeah. And then at that point he had to grab a hold of himself and tell himself, I'm not going to do this. And sometimes he would leave. He would have to leave. The problem was that he had a very competitive brother, and his brother kept trying to get him to drink. Not that the brother drank. That wasn't the deal. But the brother would do things like take him to the casino. He'd give him money to gamble because they were competing with one another. My friend finally, well actually I knew both of them, they were really good friends of mine, but the older brother lost because he died of diabetes, and the other guy, he won because he didn't, well for one thing he didn't die, and also he didn't, before his brother died, he didn't start drinking again. Anyway, so they'll go back to meetings. A person who has lost weight with the help of Weight Watchers and continues to attend meetings at least once a month. So they're doing maintenance. They want to maintain themselves. Oh. Relapse termination is common, and preparation for it needs to be part of the process. And this is some individuals, of course, make this the last stage.
It's very common for people to relapse. When relapse occurs, clients may return to any of the previous stages, of course. It is the job of the practitioner to determine which stage the client is in. And this is a problem with my friend and his brother. His brother kept taking him back. He would do things. He would force him he would challenge him to stay sober. That's what he was doing. But it was who wins in this case? Who wins in this case? Yeah, and that was the situation. Now he has diabetes, which is kind of sad, but he's also, his liver's only half functional because he was an alcoholic for a really long time. He's my age. Actually, I'll tell you, this is the most irritating thing in the world. We were born like a week apart. We're both, he's 68, I'm 68. You can see how white my hair is. Damn it. He doesn't have the first white hair in his head. His hair is coal black. It's so irritating. It's like he dyes it or something. He doesn't. But man, I tell you, I just hated being around that guy. Bastard. He's got black hair. Oh, man. And then he'd tell everybody, we were born only a week apart. We were born only a week apart. And then he'd point at my hair. It's not all right. Indians are mean. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah, he was kind of a funny guy. Okay, so you'll go back to a previous stage. And it's your job to determine what stage they've gone back to. He would go back to a previous stage. Anytime he got around alcohol, he would go back to a previous stage. Termination is the point at which there is no temptation to return to old behavior. We talk about recovering alcoholics and recovered alcoholics. A recovering alcoholic is one that is still in this maintenance stage. There's still a possibility that they will relapse. Once the temptation is gone, now they are a recovered alcoholic. It's logical. Sometimes there's always a potential that you'll go back to the way you were before. And if that is the case, then you're still in the maintenance stage. There's still a possibility of relapse. Until that possibility is gone completely, you're not recovered. And this is one of the things that you need to watch. One of the problems with heroin addiction is, of course, relapse is extremely common. It's actually harder to get off of alcohol than it is heroin. That's not the problem. It's not the problem of stopping. It's the problem of not starting again. That's the problem in heroin addiction. Heroin, nobody ever dies in rehab of heroin addiction, but people die of alcohol addiction in rehab. It's a lot more serious. There's a lot more involved. You have more body organs that are involved in alcohol. Yes, ma'am.
I got a question. I have a daughter who is now 51, and she had been clean and sober for 20 years.
Okay.
After being addicted and active for over 20 years.
Okay. She started when she was 10?
No, take it back. She was a little older, more like about 18, 20.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry. My math isn't very good.
Now I lost my train. Anyway, she was going through a hard time in her marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And Mom's the one that she always calls. Because I'm the good listener. Quiet, let me know. And so she says, Mom, I really want a good high. I said, well, you drink, right? You go to sleep, yeah? Don't you have that feeling in there somewhere? Oh, no, Mom, not that kind. I want to get back to using my heroin. It makes me feel so much better. And I asked her, I said, what in the world puts you in this place? She says, we're not having a good time in our lives. It's really, really just getting to be too much between home, relationship, and work. But she managed to get through it.
Addicts are the best excuse makers in the world.
Oh,
they,
yeah.
they can come up with any excuse to start using again. And blame anybody but themselves.
Of course. But is this a common thing?
Oh, yeah.
To even be like 15, 20 years
Sure.
out?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Well, remember Robin Williams. Snorted a lot of cocaine. And that's why he was such a erratic comedian. You know, I mean, he always had something to say, and he was always very active. Well, that's because he was snorting cocaine, a lot of cocaine. Once he stopped snorting cocaine, he wasn't nearly as funny, so he started acting instead. He wasn't a comedian anymore, now he was an actor. And he stayed off of cocaine for an extended length of time. Just before he died, just before he committed suicide, he went back to rehab. At some point, he started using again, even though he'd been clean for
All these years.
for decades, for a couple decades. Yeah. So he was a recovering addict. He wasn't recovered. That's one of the problems that we have, and of course that's a question that alcoholics have. Can I be a social drinker? Can I do that? And the answer usually is no, because you're still recovering. You're not a recovery. If you ever do recover, yeah, you can become a social drinker again. You can take a drink and not, drink the rest of the six-pack and not know it or not think about it. If you've ever watched an alcoholic drink, you'll be someplace with people drinking, and if somebody's not an alcoholic, they'll nurse a drink for an extended length of time. But an alcoholic will drink that one down and get another one. And then they act like they're nursing it along just like everybody else, but they'll finish that one and go get another one. And if you've got to actually keep an eye on them, or you don't even realize that they're consuming 3 or 4 times as much as anybody else.
I used to be married into a family of alcoholics as I look back now. And I had a brother-in-law who was in construction, and he put the things together on an open roof of the
Sure.
house. So he's walking all across these things. And when he goes home at night, he's got 2 suitcases of beer. When those are consumed, he goes to bed. Next morning, 4 o'clock, he's up and back on the job by 5.
Sure.
And he lived many, many years like that.
Yeah. If you watch alcoholics, one of the things they'll do is they will pour their drink in another room, and then they'll consume most of it before they get back to where that people can see them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're consuming a lot of alcohol, and you don't even realize it because it looks like they just have, a splash of whiskey in the bottom of the glass. But what they did, they poured a full glass, they drank most of it in the kitchen, and then they carry
Come
this
back
thing
with the
around.
residue.
They're really good at it. They're really good at hiding the fact that they're consuming as much as they are. And people don't realize it because we're not concentrating on counting the number of drinks that they've had. If you can watch this in movies, the wife will say, well, that's your 7th drink. And of course, nobody else has a clue how many drinks this guy's had because nobody else cares. But the wife is counting drinks. So, she tells him because he potentially is a recovering alcoholic.
Now, is this true also in food addictions as well?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, they'll hide food in the bathroom. If there's a linen closet, you got linen here, and behind there are lots of cookies and potato chips and stuff. My wife used to do that. She used to hide it. My wife used to do that. She used to hide food in the bathroom, and
What is the reasoning behind that?
because they don't want people to see them eat. They've got a problem, man. They know they've got a weight problem, and otherwise, she was trying to hide it from me, of course, because I'm not overweight. I'm a little bit overweight now, but I wasn't overweight then. I was an athlete, and I was running around a lot, doing a lot of things, and she felt embarrassed because she was heavier than she should have been. And of course, the military wanted her to lose weight too, because they had this, the weight standards. So she'd hide food, as confusing as that is. She went on a POW diet. She went on a POW diet. She had fish and brown rice for every meal, which, try it sometime. It doesn't take very many meals of fish and brown rice before you hate fish and you can't stand brown rice. And you start eating less and less and less, of course, because it's nasty. But she was on that diet, and she had, you know, all kinds of, and they weren't even cookies that she liked. That was her rationale. She would hide cookies that she didn't like, and she would eat them anyway because, you know, she was starving, or that she thought she was.
Sugar craving?
Yeah, so she would eat something that she didn't like. She can't stand coconut, and she'd buy coconut cookies and hide them in the bathroom and eat them.
Wow.
I know. If she ever watches this, I'm a dead man. And it's your fault.
I didn't do it. Was not my words.
Assessing stages of change. Do you currently have a problem with? And of course, you can fill in the blank. Do you currently have a problem with alcohol? Do you currently have a problem with your weight? Do you currently have a problem staying away from cigarettes or marijuana? If yes, then the client is in contemplation, preparation, or action stage. If they admit that they have a problem. If they are in the pre-contemplation stage, they won't admit it, and they'll tell you that they don't have a problem. Okay. So if they admit that they have a problem, then it's the contemplation, preparation, or the action stage. If no, then the client is, of course, in the pre-contemplation stage. Okay. Do you intend to deal with the problem? This is the question that you've asked. And if they say yes, or someday, then the client is in the contemplation stage. If they say maybe someday, then they're thinking about changing. If the answer is in the next few weeks or a specific date, then they are in the preparation stage. This is how you tell where they are. If they say right now, then they are in the action stage. If they give you an action plan. Yeah, I just joined Weight Watchers. I just joined a gym, and I'm planning on going to the gym at least 3 times a week. You know, they're in the action stage. They're doing something about their problem. Do you intend to deal with the problem? If the answer to the question is no, then ask them what leads you to say that. You're not going to deal with this problem. If the answer is because it is not a problem, the client is in the pre-contemplation stage, of course. Of course, you know they've got a problem because, well, the police are the ones that brought them to you. So you know they've got a problem, but they're not planning on dealing with it yet. If the client responds, because I have already dealt with the problem, the client is in the maintenance stage. Albert Bandura. This is Albert Bandura when he was a baby. We always see pictures of him with white hair, but this is right after he graduated from getting his bachelor's degree. And you say, well, what kind of a strange robe is that? What odd outfit is he wearing? He's Canadian, and he graduated, he's got his bachelor's degree in Canada. That's why the robe looks a little bit different than what we wear in the United States. Another theory that can be used to assess readiness or ability to make changes is the social cognitive theory. And once upon a time we called this the social learning theory. As a matter of fact, if you were taking Psych 111, we would probably still call it the social learning theory. Yeah, okay. But for reasons of looking at this as a counselor, we refer to it as the social cognitive theory. And of course it was developed by Albert Bandura, and this is him, what he looked like. Wasn't that ugly a guy. He's kind of a really ugly old man now, but I think he just died not very long ago. Anyway, it was a long time ago. The theory considers the impact of the following factors as to readiness for change: the environment that the individual is in, their personal situation, and how they are behaving. These are the 3 things that the social cognitive theory looks at. The environment that they're in, their personal situation, and how they are behaving to whatever's taking place. Personal factors include everything, your physical makeup, your brain structure, your cognitive capacity, your belief systems, your self-concept, your goals, and your emotions. I get a lot of discussions, and people talk about these things, and they need to talk about these things. If you want to become a counselor, you need to understand who you are. You need to understand where you're coming from. You need to know what kind of an impact your belief system has on you. This is all stuff that you need to deal with. If you've got a problem, we need to figure out what it is. Because when you start trying to help people, if you've got a problem, and their problem is similar to your problem, guess who you're going to be helping? You're not going to be able to help them. You're going to be dealing with your own problem. So you need to be careful. I know that I've got a problem. I have a problem with women. No offense, not those of you who are female. Because I was attracted to women that had problems. Obviously. So one of the things I had to decide or to discern was whether my wife left me because I'm such a horrible person, and left me and the kids because I was such a horrible person, or whether it was her. Was it her, or was it me? Or was it both of us? If it's both of us, I still got a problem. But if it was her, that's what I needed to decide. If it was her that was the problem, then I needed to know that, because I needed to know if I've got a problem. Am I going to raise my children to have problems? Because if you've got a problem, probably you're going to pass it on to your kids. Not genetically, of course. You're going to pass it on environmentally. That's going to be part of your environment. So, you know, that's a possibility. We see families that yell at each other. Everybody yells. Grandpa yells, grandma yells, dad yells, all the kids yell at each other, and nobody listens. And this is the environmental problem. That's not the problem in my house. The problem was I married the wrong lady. And of course it took time to figure all this stuff out. But that's one of the reasons I became a psychologist. I was trying to figure out if there's something wrong with me or if there was something wrong with her. Thank God I figured it out it was her. Okay, so your beliefs, your concept, your goals, your emotions, all of this has to do with the personal factors. We'll pick this up next time, and we'll finish this chapter, and maybe we'll start counseling next week. It's possible. I need to put all that stuff together first. I need to get everybody's history. So, despite the fact that if you haven't turned in your history, I'm not going to take 50 points off. You need to turn in your history before we start counseling. Because if you don't have a history, then nobody knows who you are, and they start calling you by your real name. We don't want that. They need to call you by your character's name.